Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just so everyone is aware, this will be recorded today by our friends at Minuteman Media Network, so just be aware that you're being recorded, although most of the focus should be on the presentation, not any of you. So I'm Jessica Porter. I'm the Assistant Town Manager as well as the HR Director here in town. I just want to welcome you to our first official Black History Month event for employees. I'd like to take a brief moment to recognize Magnolia Bagley and Aaron McMorrow from our HR team. Their efforts were integral in organizing this event and making it possible. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Joe Palumbo. He's a member of the town's DEI Commission, and he will be presenting Hidden History, 10 Things About Black History in Concord. I hope you find this presentation both educational and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who set this up, and we also need to thank Carrie, the town manager, because originally that was her idea that we need to get something like this started in town, so I appreciate that. And I'm Joe, if I haven't met you before. How's sound? Everyone can hear me okay? Good. It's nice to see you, and I'm sorry. I want to start first out that there's a little lie behind this presentation. The presentation is called 10 Facts, or 10 Things You Need to Know. There's way more than 10 things. I didn't want to tell you, so I hope I lure you here with 10, and then I'm just going to tell you so much in 30 minutes, you can decide which 10 you want to take from it, okay? So in case you're wondering if for the list, there's no list coming, you can kind of make your own list. And that might be a question we say at the end, from today, what are the 5 things you want to take away from it? Because we all come to this work from different places, and the whole idea is to take this 30 minutes out of your day. My job is to try to make it useful enough so you can say, well, that was worth the 30 minutes. I could have been having lunch at my desk, but I gave up 30 minutes. My job is to try to make it worthwhile for you. So I'm Joe Palumbo. I grew up in town. I grew up on Lexington Road. And until my dad was a farmer, and until 2014 when he passed, he was the oldest living farmer in Concord. And when you grow up in a little town like this, you get history pounded into your head as a child. So a lot of what I thought was Concord history, I was a super little history nerdy kid, so I got this, I had it all down. And this is sort of the Concord that many of us know, or that was pounded in a lot of our heads. This is a tea towel, you know those little towels they put out in bathrooms? This is, I think, in the visitor center bathroom. And I saw it one day. I take pictures of odd little things. It's like, this is what pretty much, if you look at these words, this is what Concord often talks about and thinks about, and visitors come to see us about. And I like this as a reminder, because there's nothing in this about Black history. There's no mention of indigenous history. There's no mention of the farmers. There's no mention of lots of folks. So this is a window about how we start to try to tell a more authentic narrative. And lots of people are doing this in the town. The library's working on it. The Concord Museum's working on it. The Robbins House is working on it. There's the Umbrella. And we're all just taking our little piece to try to really kind of leapfrog Concord's understanding of its history into the 21st century. So kind of remember this. I won't probably be talking about any of those things on there. I will start with this whole 1635 thing, because Concord, we get quite excited that, in 2035, the town will be 400 years old. Now, 400 years is a cool thing, but we just need to keep it in perspective. Before anybody from Europe even showed up here, the indigenous folks of this area lived here for 10,000 or more years. So can we just keep a little perspective? 400 is cool, but for over 10,000 is a lot longer. So we know that well before any Europeans ever showed up here, the indigenous lived here for thousands of years successfully in a land that they would call Musketaquit, which was the rough translation for the area in which they lived in. And this is not a talk about indigenous history of Concord. That's another time. But I just wanted to kind of center it, like understanding. We know that about in the 1600s, this great migration of people from England specifically. This is the first time the words New England were put on a map. Long story very short, the French were moving into the Americas, the Spanish were moving into the Americas. They had New Spain, New France, and the English were like, well, wait a minute, we need to have a New England. And so John Smith, put this map for the first time, New England, and they started like trying to make little plantations over here, one of which was called Concord. So this is sort of the arrival. And that is fundamental to understanding black history, because really the first time any African people from Africa were brought into this New England was right around the time Concord was founded. And what I love about history is everyone leaves receipts. And there's receipts, and they wrote down what they were doing. They were not shy about what they were doing. And I think this is a very important little document to understand. This is in 1645, so about 10 years after Concord was being settled. Winthrop, Governor Winthrop, he was the governor of the colony, and his brother-in-law from Salem was talking about how we can kind of help the colony grow. He said, you know, this war, and that was a war they were having against local indigenous people, this war would allow God to deliver Indian captives into our hands who could then be exchanged for African slaves, which would be more useful than we conceive. The colony requires a stock of slaves sufficient to do all our business, for the white settlers desire freedom to plant for themselves and would demand very great wages. You know very well the colony could maintain 20 slaves cheaper than one English servant. And why this is important is it helps you see it was a very conscious decision to enslave local indigenous people, put them into the trade, and swap them out to bring African enslaved people who had been kidnapped from Africa, brought here to the colony. So this is Boston, this is Concord, this is all the communities around here. Now, when I was in school, I don't think they do it now, no one taught us that. No one taught us that Concord was built on the backs of stolen labor of both indigenous and enslaved people. Receipts, you can go, thanks to the folks at the special collections, you can go into the town archives and elsewhere and find the receipts of all the different people, how many folks enslaved they had, both indigenous and later on kidnapped Africans. And this is not even updated. Beth Van Duzer is doing a lot of work to even update that further to find out how many families there were. And to be contextual, we are not having this conversation about it's our fault. In 2025, it's not any of our faults that this happened. We are not responsible that it happened, but we are responsible for knowing about it, because if we know about it, it may impact decisions and how we operate in 2025. So just put that little context in here. So here's lots of the well-known families in Concord were built with enslaved labor, stolen enslaved labor. We use this at the Robbins House a lot. It's important because sometimes people do this thing, well, enslavement in the North wasn't like the South. There were no plantations in Concord. Yes, but owning another person is still reprehensible. This is a bill of sale in the town archives from one neighbor selling a 2-year-old girl to another neighbor. The sum of 30 pounds to be secured and paid by Sarah Melvin of said Concord widow, do hereby fully absolve, sell, grant, convey, and pass over to Sarah Melvin and her heirs and assign forever a certain Negro girl being a slave about 2 years old called Violet. And then Violet's name is crossed out, and because they changed her name to Nancy. Because when you're an enslaved person, your name was not your own. And so at 2 years old, this widow decided she wanted a 2-year-old girl. She bought this 2-year-old girl from her neighbor and changed her name. And the reason we use this is this helps people very viscerally understand what enslavement was like in Concord. That someone thought they could own you, someone thought they could buy you and sell you even if you were a 2-year-old girl, and they could change your name. Concord, all the towns around here, Boston, was rich with enslaved folk. The one that we used to talk about a lot in Concord is a man named John Jack. John Jack, if you have time on a warm day, go up the hill right next to us. You can go see his grave. He has probably the most famous gravestone in the town. The story behind him is he was enslaved to a man named Benjamin Barron. He was able to eventually buy his freedom by working it off. And when he passed right before the American Revolution, a local lawyer put in this marker that talks about, although he was born in Africa, says, though born in a land of slavery, he was born free. Though he lived in a land of liberty, he lived a slave, till by his honest though stolen labors, he acquired the source of his freedom. No long before death, the grand tyrant took him. This was right before the American Revolution of a loyalist trying to tweak the locals, say, hey, you're all running around going, we must be free from the king, we shall have freedom, we will fight for freedom, but you owned enslaved people. So this was a local, sort of someone who was sympathetic to the British cause, tweaking us. Now, for many years, Concord would use this as like, look, we had, John Jack was the first free man to own land in town. Yes, he was, but he also lived for many years as an enslaved person. You can go see his gravesite. It is up on the hill. It's probably the only significant monument to any man of color currently in sort of our downtown area. This is fascinating to me. The Old North Bridge, one of the most iconic things in Concord. In 2004, the National Park did what's called, they study how a historic structure was built over time. Well, the bridge has been rebuilt many times. It keeps flooding. And what they found in their study, that in the bridge that was standing on April 19th, 1775, that version of it was built in 1760. In 1760, they went to the receipts of who built that bridge, who got paid to build the bridge they stood at on April 19th. And we find out that from the documents, the work consisted of 28 men, including the enslaved of Timothy Billing and Nathaniel Billing. Timothy Billing, 10 days and a half, 2 by his man. Nathaniel Billing by his man. So that means the 2 enslaved people, possibly more, 2 documented enslaved people actually helped build the Old North Bridge. Their labor was used. They didn't get the pay went to their enslaver. But just the concept of how we talk about the bridge and how we teach people about the bridge, what a more significant story when we start explaining to people that the hands of the enslaved helped build the bridge that we, so when we talk about the concept of freedom and the expansion of freedom, I think that's an important little fact if you want to add to your 10 facts. On April 19th, 1775, we all know the battle at the bridge, but we now know that we call them patriots of color. Between 20 and 40 men of the approximately 4,000 who fought that day were descent of either African or Native American descent. Makes sense, right? We've had over 100 years of enslavement and subjugation of the indigenous in the area. Of course they're going to be here on April 19th. They're here like everyone else, where it's all the same community. Some of the most famous men of color, Cesar Robbins, Brister Freemer, Philip Barrett, all men from Concord who served either that day on April 19th, 1775, or later on will serve in the larger war. This image itself, just seeing images of black patriots and remembering that this was a diverse society. Boston was diverse, the towns were diverse, but for most of the 20th century, our imagery didn't do that, so people of color did not see themselves in the story because of how the history was written. It's a lot of significant work we're doing for the 250th around these black patriots. So another fact you might take today about patriots of color. One of the patriots of color is Cesar Robbins. Cesar Robbins' home is the Robbins House Museum here in Concord. Now, what's interesting about this is we go back to the bridge story. The bridge only lasts so many years. They built it in 1760 with the help of enslaved labor. 1775, the events of April 19th happened. By 1788, they got to rebuild the bridge again. When you go to the receipts, however, Cesar Robbins works on the new bridge. Brister Freeman works on the new bridge, but they're paid this time. So that, because they're now free men after the American Revolution. So what an important contrast this is when we talk about the bridge and how it symbolizes or can symbolize the expansion of freedom, that when it was built, enslaved labor helped build it. But after the American Revolution, we know at least 2 men whose names we know helped build it, and they got paid and they kept the money this time. Labor was no longer stolen. So that's, I think, a kind of a good story to take about the Old North Bridge. Robbins House, if you haven't been there, it's open all year now. It's going to open in April. It'll be open 7 days a week, 10 to 4 through October. Definitely should go. It is the only known structure in the Metro West area of a patriot of color's home that we know of, where a man who serves in the American Revolution, a man of color who serves in the Revolution, a home for him and his family. It's the only place you can see that here in town. This is a nice picture. Does this look familiar to anyone? this is where the Robbins House actually sat. Where it is now was placed there a few, about 20 years ago when they were saving it. This is where it really sat. It's on the edge of what we call the Great Field or the Great Meadow. If you've been to the waste treatment plant, that's where this is. You go to the waste treatment plant and you look over the river. There was a whole neighborhood of black families at the what we know as the Great Fields. So it's worth taking a walk at someday. Next time, go to the waste treatment plant. You can see where the Robbins House sat. This is, I always think this is an important picture. I say, welcome to Concord's historically black neighborhood, home of John Jack, the Robbins, the Garrison. So like John Jack's house was there, the Robbins family house was there, and right now, this is how, you know, it's the waste treatment plant, so you can't really get there. But it makes me wonder, like as we're trying to tell these stories, maybe we could have some signage there that actually talks about the history. We figured out how to spend money on a sign for the turtles, no offense to the turtles, but if we can have a sign for the turtles, maybe we could have a sign for our black history fan that lived there. Brister Freeman, another kind of famous Concord gentleman. Couple of pieces about him. Brister Freeman, we have the desk. The desk is not his desk. Reason we always show the desk for Brister Freeman was a young boy, and he was given as a gift at 9 years old to a man named John Cummings. John Cummings got two big gifts on his wedding, a desk and young Brister. This desk is in the Concord Museum. Brister most likely polished this desk. So just give you that concept. This very wealthy doctor gets a child and a desk. That's part of Brister Freeman's story. The home that Brister's stolen labor that he worked in, that's the Cumming House. Next time you go to the Rotary, when you're stuck in traffic on your way home, look to the right as you hit the Rotary. That's where that house is. It's currently run by the prison farm. That's where Brister Freeman's stolen labor was for a good 25 years of his life. However, he serves the American Revolution. We're not exactly sure how it happens, but when he comes back, he doesn't call himself Brister Cumming anymore, his enslaved name. He calls himself by his real name, Brister Freeman, or Brister Free Man. And he spends the rest of his life in Concord eking his way as a free man in Concord, pretty much on the near Walden Pond. If you've been, there's a monument that was put in probably about 7 years ago near what's called Brister's Woods. We know we have a lot of things in town named. We have Brister's Woods, Brister's Spring Road. That's all because of Brister Freeman. There's a lot of good stories about how hard he had to fight to kind of keep his agency in Concord. This is a map from the 1960s, that even in the 1960s we were mentioning it on our maps. Brister's Hill, named for Negro Brister Freeman. Mentioned by Thoreau and Walden. Many people think that's the only reason we remember Brister Freeman, because Thoreau mentions him. However, Thoreau calls him by the wrong name. Thoreau calls him Scipio Brister. Scipio Brister is not Brister Freeman. Scipio Brister is a different black person from Lincoln. But for many years, it got into the Concord narrative. We even have this little sign on top of Brister's Hill Road that people very well-meaning in the 90s put up, and it says, Scipio Brister, slave before 1772, lived near here. We're working on getting that taken down because A, it's inappropriate language, but more importantly, it's not him. It's a different black person from another town. Can we get this fixed? I know we're working on that. Sorry. We know that back to Caesar. Caesar had a daughter named Susan Garrison. She married a man named Jack Garrison. Jack Garrison was an escaped enslaved man from New Jersey, came up here. It's kind of awesome. We have his picture because for some reason that we haven't been able to figure out, someone brought him to Boston to sit for a picture, and the Concord Museum holds these several portraits of him. It's in the Concord Museum, the original. They have a few of them. He lives to be 92, we think. He has a cane. He was given a cane by the town of Concord for being the oldest man in town. So the day he went to get his picture taken in Boston, he clearly was like, I'm bringing my cane. And he brought it with him, and he sat for this portrait. We can talk more about the details of why they did that, but it's one of two photos we have of famous black Concordians. His daughter and son go to the public school in Concord. Next time you walk out front of the townhouse, look across the street. The Masonic Lodge was the center school. That's where the Garrison's children went to school, both John and Ellen. Ellen you may have heard about, a bit more famous. Ellen marched in the parade with another little white girl when she was 12, to the cheers of some and the derisions of others. We know that that emphasis allowed her to grow up. She became a teacher. She worked in the South, teaching the recently emancipated. I know if you've been in town the last year, you've heard a lot about Erin Garrison, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I just love this little primary source. This is a little piece of paper. The Robbins House referred to her as a passport. Basically, in 1854, she wants to leave town to go in the South and do some of this teaching. She needs a piece of paper from the local judge that says she's a free person. Ellen Garrison, age 31. We know she's 5'2", complexion black, eyes hard to read, hair curly black. And basically, Judge Hoare signs a piece of paper, because this is the time of the Fugitive Slave Act where people are being captured and taken back into slavery. So just think about the bravery of someone that leaves this little town to go to the South, and all you have is a piece of paper to prove that I'm a free person. That's part of, maybe goes on your list of 10 things. We know that Ellen ends up in California. She passes and is buried in Altadena. This is her resting spot in Altadena, California, which was in the news a lot lately because of the horrific fires. Altadena was over 9,000 homes in Altadena were destroyed. And it's fascinating. This is the cemetery. The fire went around the cemetery. There's a great New York Times article about it. Many people feel the cemetery in Altadena saved a third of the town because it became a fire break. Because of the lack of trees, the fire went around and saved a swath of the city. But that's where Ellen rests. This grave was only discovered in 2021. Robbins House has a connection with the Altadena Historic Society. They found her gravesite, and now it's marked. And we found her sister, or they found her sister, and they found her husband. Because when you're a famous person like a Hawthorne or a Thoreau or an Alcott or an Emerson, everyone saves your stuff. Your desk, your chair, your pen. The wayside, they have like the shaving mirror that Hawthorne used. Great. But when you're a regular person, people don't save your stuff. So to construct the history of marginalized people takes more work and different kind of work. I want to talk about John Garrison since we're in the townhouse. This is Ellen's brother. So as you know how in the family there's like one that goes out and explores the world, sometimes there's someone that stays home. John Garrison was the brother that stayed home. He was friends with Thoreau. He worked lots of odd jobs in town, building a garden at the Old Manse, and eventually he starts doing town volunteer jobs for the highway department. He tithes for the local church, and eventually he works as a fireman part-time, and eventually he gets the job as the superintendent of this townhouse. He has a job for 15 years. This is one of his paychecks, $115 for the year in 1863, I think. And it's signed by Ephraim Wales Bull. So if you know your Concord nerdiness, Ephraim Wales Bull is the inventor of the Concord grape. He was a select board member that year, so he signs his check. So thanks to Jesse at the library, we have this. We have the check. We have his signature on the back. He was the superintendent of this actual house we're in right now. And that progress allowed him to make enough money to build a little house on Monument Street. That's a picture of the house. You can see it. It's just up the street. So it's an example of his grandfather fought at the Old North Bridge or was an enslaved man in Concord. Within 2 generations, John's able to make his way in the world. We've done a little investigation, and Tish at the cemetery was helpful to find us. He's buried in what's called the town lot. That's a picture of it in Sleepy Hollow. All she has is that little grave card that says he died September 1st, 1872, but we don't know where in the town lot he is. So it feels like if Altadena could figure out where Ellen is, we can probably figure out where John is, and maybe we should honor John. But I think as a town employee, for those of you who are town employees, he's a really good story that you should know and talk about. I'll be quick. Okay. This is just a picture of during the 19th century, these famous luminaries came to town. Frederick Douglass came to Concord 3 times in the 19th century. Harriet Tubman came to Concord 3 times. Sojourner Truth came here at least twice. Those are the Haydens, these famous abolitionists from Boston, the Crafts, other famous abolitionists. I mean, I think there were more black speakers in Concord in the 19th century than there are in the 21st century. It was a hotbed for a connection because of what Concord was doing. This is every town, most towns who've had Frederick Douglass come and speak acknowledge that somewhere. That's a thing we're working on as well. It's a great story. The people here, the Haydens, the man with the hand on his hip, and his wife next to him. They were very powerful abolitionists in Boston. Very famous escape story during the time of the fugitive slave law. A man named Shadrach Minkins. He gets secreted out of Boston. It's a great story, and he gets stopped along the way and hidden. One of the places he's hidden is in Concord, the house right across from the library, the Bigelow House. There's it in the late 1800s in black and white. Here it is today. It's an amazing story where he's brought there at 2 in the morning. They give him something to eat. And he makes his way the next day to Leominster. He'll eventually make his way to freedom in Canada. He lives in Montreal, where he has a little barber shop. Concord had a little piece in that. And the people who live there know, because the Canadian broadcasts have come out to their house and done a documentary on it. It's a big deal. We don't have any marker. We don't talk about it unless you're on a tour. You can't see a thing. You'd never know. But it's fascinating. The next town he goes to is Leominster. This is what they do in Leominster at the next house he goes to. So when I see these little clues, it's fascinating to me. Like, why are we not talking about these things? I don't know. Quickly, just Thomas the Dugan family is another famous black family. Thomas Dugan was an escaped man from Virginia. He brings the rye cradle, which is a certain instrument that they use in Virginia. He teaches the local farmers how to do the rye cradle. The Dugan, he marries a woman named Jenny Dugan. They become sort of quite well known in the West Concord, Whites Pond area. They have a son named George Washington Dugan. If you've been in Concord, George Washington Dugan is Concord's famous black hero and veteran. He served in the Massachusetts 54th, the 1st Black Regiment, the only black man from Concord to sign up in the Massachusetts 54th. He gives his life. That's not George, that's just a man in the 54th. He gives his life on the attack at Fort Wagner. His body's never recovered, and we know he's listed as missing. It takes Concord a long time, from 1863 till 2023. It's the first time we acknowledge George in a ceremony. Tish Hopkins, Beth Van Duzer do work to get George a plot and a marker because his sister's buried there, and amazingly, the spot next to his sister's empty, according to Tish, so they get the Army to create that. We have a ceremony to acknowledge it, and then just a few months ago, the plaque was fixed and updated in the center of town. So that's work we're doing to try to slowly do this work. And it's not just me, tons of people working on this in town. So that's sort of the end of when the black community was really strong in Concord. This is a very interesting thing. 1872, if you're a town employee, you might want to know this, called the Race Fracas on the Mill Dam. This is from the town report in 1872. It's small, I'll read it to you. You guys still do the town report every year, right? Has everything you ever want to know. In 1872, a detestable fracas on the mill dam last spring, in which a dozen men, more or less, attacked in a cowardly and brutal manner 2 colored persons, led us to appoint, under the vote of the town, a policeman. So the first active police department in Concord was a direct result of a racial attack in the center of town. This date lines up to pretty much when the Garrisons left town. After John Garrison passes, his wife sells the house. Some historians believe the climate in the town helped sort of the last black family go, I want to move to somewhere where there are other black families. Because if you read this bottom part, this is kind of written with, I don't know what they're trying to say, but it talks about, hey, if you're going to hire a priest, some people will be happy, some people won't, because it costs a lot of money in this last sentence. If you do employ one police officer, with the absence of anything for him to do, the provoking good order which will everywhere prevail, united with the complaints of the grumblers at the expense of the thing, will soon lead you to regret that you did, and not let things go on in the old way, and rely on every person to take care of themselves. So if you read that, you're not really sure whether they were happy they had a policeman or not, but the town of Concord police should be proud that they exist because of a response to this incident. I won't go into some detail. You can read it on the oral histories are fascinating the library has. These are probably in the late 20th century, when people were rather elderly, they were asking them for their memories of turn of the century Concord. And this top one just talks about how at the fairs they would play the African Dodger game. If you're not familiar with the African Dodger game, it was a thing that they would do at fairs where a person of color would place their face in a canvas and people would pay money to throw balls at that person's face. So that's a part of Concord history going on in the turn of the century. The second bullet talks in some detail about the minstrel shows that were given here in the center of town. And then fascinatingly, there's a book about Concord history called Days of Strawberry and Streetcars, which came out in the 80s and was republished, I think, 6 times until 2006. The centerpiece of that book is this picture of a minstrel show that was taking place at Monument Hall in 1925. And you see not only blackface, but you see red face in the upper right-hand corner. And and I think it's important to understand that's sort of probably what the feeling of the town was like in early turn of the century, 1920s. The other thing I think is interesting, this book was published in 1985, but it kept being published without anyone flagging this picture. The last version of this book came out in 2006 and no one's flagged it. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that we stopped selling this at the visitor center. By about 1910, I think only 6 black single adults were in Concord on the census. So we had most of the black families in the 19th century had left Concord by then. We talk about this in the 20s, and then really post-World War II, Concord suffered a bit under both our restrictive zoning, informal redlining, historic preservation movement. All of that kept Concord from building the kind of housing that would have brought in lots of people and lots of diversity. We created the Minuteman National Park. That took over 400 acres offline for development and displaced over 200 families, our businesses. And I'm sure in 1959 it may have seemed like a good idea, but now we're living under some of the ramifications of what we've done is created a racially isolated community. Concord, unfortunately, part of our black history is we're a racially isolated community. Now, every other township around us has grown its black population between the 2010 and 2020 census. Concord's the only town whose black population has shrunk. I show this picture because sometimes I think this is like a postcard from the 60s. It reminds me of sometimes we're a little bit stuck in this vision. And one of the things we did in the 60s was we got involved with the METCO program, which in 1968 was one of the early communities that would bring students of color from the city to go to school in Concord. And it was a gift and is a gift to Concord. Because if it wasn't for the METCO program, that's one thing that helps us end our racial isolation. Too often the METCO program is talked about like it's a gift to the students coming. It's a gift to us more than the students that are coming 2 hours on a bus. But even then, in 1978, a historic moment in Concord's history with METCO, there was a very horrible race riot at the high school. The METCO was a fight at the end of the day. Hundreds of kids were involved. The buses were chased by kids in cars out to Route 2. It was reported in the Washington Post and the New York Times. The METCO families took all their students out of Concord. And it took over a year for them to figure out a system. If you've ever heard of the Human Rights Council in Concord, that grew out of this incident. Educator named Willie, Mr. Willie, Dr. Willie, helped create the Human Rights Council. So that's a long time ago. I know 78 is a long time ago, but we still are working through these issues. So this helps us give us some perspective of our sort of a black history in Concord. I just should cut a couple of things that I always point out. I always take these weird pictures that I see. I always think about what's important to us. On the left are these beautiful, they're all over town, these beautiful, kiosks we have on all our great trail systems. They're nice. Brewster Freeman's house, we didn't have anything but that rock. And so until this year, this little thing got put up, but this is an individual Boy Scout on his own, raised the money, hand-built it, went through every town town committee he needed to go to get approval to get this one sign in. It's great, right? Great for him. But is that what we have to rely on, like an individual Boy Scout, to do these markers when we really, what's important to us? This is something we should be thinking about. Just in terms of, we've removed some offensive signage. We've talked about the Bristers Hill one we're working on. The hospital took the name of the enslaver off the building. That's another move of people trying to move forward. And I guess my question is, who are we? Who do we want to become? That's the Concord of the 20th century. and what we were known for. And that's what, are we more than that? And that's something I think this work's about. We've got communities all over the state now who are marking the stories of their enslaved, marking monuments to their famous black heroes. And we're doing some of that. We've made a lot of progress in the last few years. We've named a middle school after a black hero. We're doing a whole bunch of stuff for Patriots of Color. We got a grant from the state of Massachusetts. The select board allowed the Juneteenth flag to fly 2 years in a row. We've got Juneteenth celebrations. So we're making progress, but feels like we've got some more work to do. And I'd like to just leave you this one thought. I always, 'cause sometimes people say, well, gosh, why do we have to keep talking about this? This is rather divisive, isn't it? I always like this quote: the only people who think representation is not that important usually have always been represented. So I'd like to leave you with that thought. So thank you for, this is a quick 30 minutes. I hope in your mind you can find at least 10 factoids, but I wanted to give you space for any questions or comments you have right now. Happy to take them. Well, we also can talk privately. Thanks so much for coming today. I know it's warm in here. Thank you.